Okay, tonight we're going to be looking at Much Ado About Nothing, and we're going to be looking a bit more closely about the language that Shakespeare uses. So it's important to remember when looking at this play that Much Ado is a play about misunderstandings. It's about misunderstandings and mistaken meanings. Shakespeare uses language to really explore a lot of these ideas. So, for example, he uses the pun a lot in the play, and the pun really awakens the audience to what the play's about. This whole idea of the ambiguity of language and how people can misunderstand things or take things or mishear things. For example, the watch with deformed. Even the title, noting nothingness. In the title, this right from the outset, Shakespeare's using the pun to show the audience that this play is going to be about eavesdropping and spying, and that whole idea of misunderstanding and mistaken meanings. So, what what language techniques does Shakespeare use? Well, he uses a lot, and the craft that Shakespeare uses, he was well aware of what other people were doing at his time, his contemporaries. He was also well aware of what writers had done in the past, and he pulls upon this rich heritage that he has at his fingertips in his plays. They're crafted, they're not he doesn't accidentally create these rich images and these wonderful works of poetry. They're all crafted by him, not by mistake. So he uses blank verse. He uses rhyming couplets. Quatrains. Lyrical songs. Prose. Imagery. All of these come together in a crafted way for Shakespeare to really explore the things he wants, the ideas that he wants to bring to his audience. And so when you see these things, you need to ask yourself, why is Shakespeare doing them in these places? What's he trying to tell us? What does he want us to see and to understand? And or what's he trying to, what sense, what mood, what atmosphere is he trying to create by doing them? So we're going to look at some of these in more detail. So firstly, we're going to look at imagery. So, Shakespeare uses imagery for a number of different reasons. To create a mood or atmosphere. An example of when he does that is when Hero is coming to before the galling scene of Beatrice, and Hero's image of the pleached bower with its honeysuckles ripened by the sun. She creates this beautiful image of the garden, and her image is actually creating the atmosphere or mood in the same way that a modern director would use lighting or stage to create the mood. Shakespeare uses language. Another example is at the end of the funeral scene. Don Pedro describes the scene of a gentle day, dapples of a drowsy east with spots of grey. This beautiful image that he creates, it's there to create the atmosphere, the mood of that scene. Imagery also deepens the dramatic impact. It gives us insights into characters. It intensifies meaning, and it also heightens the emotional force. So when you see Shakespeare using imagery, ask yourself, what is the reason for this? What is Shakespeare trying to do? So let's think about some examples of this. Let's think about Beatrice. She uses imagery to undermine male military values. So when she for example, she describes Benedict as Signor Montanto, which is a fencing term. She says he has no stomach, which is calling into question his courage. Some of the words, such as boarded, can be thought of as like boarding a ship, as an allusion to military power. Or it could be thought of being a sexual innuendo of a male boarding a woman. Likewise, there's a lot of fencing terms used. Again, that whole idea of the sword thrusting is you have a lot of sexual imagery, which is quite violent, and it alludes to male aggression. But then this whole idea of the boarded, with regard to the conflict, you have the whole idea of the conflict between Benedict and Beatrice. But in that conflict, Benedict's insults are broken on her like lances. So he might be coming at her with his insults, but she's more powerful than her in this battle, and she breaks his insults like a broken lance. Now the images are taken from Elizabethan culture. So the whole idea of the fencing terms would have been very well known to an Elizabethan audience. Things like, as well, Benedict laments that Lovestruck Claudio has exchanged the military drum of fife and for the lover's tabor and pipe, which are things that the Elizabethans would have understood. They would have known what that would be like. One of the other ways that Shakespeare uses imagery is in, so we're still talking about imagery, so there's the similes and metaphor. Well, actually, let's look at the techniques he uses more widely. So the techniques Shakespeare uses to build his images are simile. So for example, when he comparing that one thing to another as using like or as, Benedict thinks Beatrice would exceed Hero as much in beauty as the first of May doth the last of December. So you see that being used in Act 1, Scene 1. Then you have metaphor. One of the powerful place that metaphor is used is when Leonardo expresses his anger and disgust at his daughter's presumed immorality. In Act 4, Scene 1, round about lines 132 to 36. Why she, oh, she is fallen into the pit of ink, that the wide sea hath drops too few to wash her clean again, and salt too little which may season give to her foul tainted flesh. Then we've got personification. Now, metaphor is it tends to be a stronger comparison for building an image than simile, and we see personification throughout the play. Shakespeare likens all kinds of things to people, giving them human feelings and attributes. For example, Beatrice talks of repentance with his bad legs. And then there's a fourth type of imagery that Shakespeare pulls upon is classical allusion. He does this in all his plays, and it's this whole idea of taking images from classical mythology. Now, the Elizabethan audience would have been really familiar with classical mythology, and Shakespeare uses this. Now, it's very interesting that when you see the when you compare Benedict to Beatrice, Benedict uses a lot of classical imagery, Beatrice doesn't. A man in Elizabethan England a gentleman would have had a classical education, whereas a woman would not have. She would have had an awareness, she would have known what these things were because they were in the popular vernacular, but she wouldn't have had the same education that her male counterpart would have had. So when Benedict pulls on these illusions, he is showing off how educated he is. Now, there are numerous references to gods and goddesses. So you have Cupid and Venus. These are love deities. You have Diana, which is the goddess of chastity. And we see Claudio using the Venus and Diana to compare and contrast what he saw, what he thought Hero was, the Diana, and what he believes she is as the Venus. Then you have Hymen. She's the goddess of marriage. You have Eight, who was the god of discord. And according to classical mythology, he sat at the gates of hell. And you also have the mentions to Jove and Phoebus, Apollo, Vulcan, Hercules, Hector, Troilus, Leander, Europa, and the Harpies. So when you're reading through the play and you see these references, have a look them up, find out who they are, so it gives you a better understanding. Now, interestingly, Benedict, after the masked ball, when he's lost in one of these little battles with Beatrice, he uses all four of these techniques. In Act 2, Scene 1, lines 181 to 95, he says that his own visor had come to life and joined Beatrice in mocking him, so that's personification. Her words were stabbing poniards, a metaphor. He is defenceless like a man at the mark, with a whole army shooting at him. Simile. And in his eyes Beatrice is the infernal Eight in good apparel, the classical illusion. Now, a lot of these classical illusions also, a lot of the imageries will echo the preoccupations in the play. For example, love, or the fear of the emasculation of men by women. An image that's often an image that often keeps coming back and keeps recurring is the image of the cuckold. So that whole idea of the man who has been his wife is oh, the word's gone up my head. The idea of the wife who has slept with another man. And so the cuckold was a picture of, it's an idea of the cuckoo, and the cuckoo lays its eggs in the nest of another bird. But the whole image of the cuckold was this funny creature that had horns, almost like a bull. So when you see that you see the bull image, you see that the recurring, and the cuckold, and so these are important imageries that Elizabethans would have understood, and it comes in with that whole idea of the men being scared that women are going to be unfaithful to them. That was the word I was trying to get. and that they will be made a fool of. Because the thing with a cuckold was, the whole idea of it was that a man would be turned into a cuckold, he'd grow these horns on his head, and everyone would be able to see the horns but the man himself, and thus he would be made a fool of. So let's look at another technique that Shakespeare uses. So we've been looking at imagery, now we're going to look at antithesis. So antithesis is when you take two things that are opposites, so the opposition of words or phrases against each other. So a really good example of that would be the Merry War, as an example of antithesis. Shakespeare uses this extensively, and he uses this technique extensively not only in Much Ado but in all of his plays. Can't spell right. And the reason he does it is it powerfully expresses conflict through opposites. So his whole Shakespeare's dramatic style of writing, his dramatic style is characterized by the concern for comparison and contrast. Opposition and juxtaposition. So he sets character, you see character against character, scene against scene. So in the structure of the play, you see the antithesis actually within the structure. So you'll have one scene which will be quite tragic set against a scene which is quite comic. Emotional, and similarly in the tones, you'll have emotional tone against emotional tone. So you'll see that with the scenes, you'll have that tragic scene and versus that comic scene, and you'll see that in the tone of the play as well. Also word against word. Phrase against phrase. So it's really important to look for, when you're looking at a play, look for doubles in the characters, themes and the ideas. So the characters, for example, you have Beatrix and Benedict. But even within Beatrix and Benedict, those are two you've got those characters in conflict, but when you bring them together, you can then contrast them with Claudio and Hero. Claudio and Hero are they portray that whole idea of the traditional marriage, which is played out in the patriarchal society, whereas Beatrice and Benedict break away from that, and they follow their own path. They have this merry war. They're constantly fighting, but at the same time they're perfect for each other, and they don't conform to the societal norms of courtship. So you see that within the characters, and then also within the themes of the patriarchal society and the traditional gender role of the woman, versus Beatrice, who is hugely independent. You see it in the characters such as the rival brothers, Don Pedro and Don John. You see it if you can compare and contrast Leonardo, where he manipulates his daughter, against Hero's dutiful obedience. Beatrice is liberated, and she's warring against all forms of male dominance. So you see this, that Shakespeare, but through the use of antithesis, is really able to explore these ideas. He also uses antithesis to reveal characters' inner life. So if you're thinking about Beatrice, Leonardo says about her, this is a key verse in the play: she hath often dreamed of unhappiness, and waked herself with laughing. Act 2, Scene 1, lines 261 to 262. So that antithesis there of the unhappiness and the laughing really shows us something about Beatrice. I'll just write Beatrice and where to find that. So it's Act 2, Scene 1, and it's lines 261 to 2, and it's the unhappiness versus laughing. However, there's you see all these things in the play, but there's that deeper antithesis within the play itself. That whole idea of so within the theme, the appearance versus reality. Which again we come back to that, the punning on nothing and noting in the title. So right from the beginning we see this as a play of concerning perception, what is real and what is not real. As the play progresses, the characters are going to they have to constantly question, can I trust this? Is what I see the reality? Is what I hear reality? Is what I know to be true? Is what I think to be true really true? And then the climax of the play, when the denouncement scene of Hero, this antithesis reaches a really sad and tragic climax with Claudio's farewell to Hero, where he says, "But fare thee well, most foul, most fair, farewell, thou pure impiety and impietous purity." So that's Act 4, Scene 1. Yeah. Another really key quote to memorize about all these different ideas, and it really shows the power of antithesis in the play. So finally, on this video, we're going to look at repetition. So, often Shakespeare will use words repeatedly, and he does so, again, it creates atmosphere. It develops characters. Dramatic force. Words, rhythms, sounds that are repeated, they add intensity. And they heighten that dramatic force. They also deepen the emotional and and imaginative significance. It also gives insight to character. For example, when you read Dogberry's speeches, he's very repetitive, and that gives us an insight into how tedious he is. The repetition also embodies Benedict and Beatrice's merry war. If you look at their exchanges, there's an awful lot of repetition. Also, if you just look, for example, look at the lexical words most frequently used. For example, love is used more than 90 times. Which shows that love is going to be a major theme of the play. So I hope that helps.